I helped my neighbor carry a wardrobe down to the basement. That mistake almost cost me my life. Down there were 3 more, all locked. One was empty, and it had a tag with my name on it. Hello everyone, my name is John. I'm 27 years old, and for the past year and a half, I've been living in one of those brick 2-story townhouses in a suburb of Columbus, Ohio. It's a quiet place, boring enough to make you yawn, perfect for pulling myself together after a failed relationship and an attempt to build a career as an artist in the big city. Now I work remotely as a technical writer, and my days are as identical as 2 drops of water. Coffee, laptop, takeout dinner, rare video calls with friends who are gradually drifting away. My social interaction was limited to the courier and my neighbor. That neighbor's name was Arthur Graves, a man in his 60s, trim, with silver hair combed with impeccable, almost old-fashioned elegance. He was always dressed as if he were about to go to a business meeting or to church. His trouser creases were perfect, his shirt buttoned all the way up. He was polite, but distant. Our dialogues never lasted longer than 30 seconds and revolved around the weather, mowing the lawn, or the occasional junk mail. He lived alone. I knew nothing about his past, except for a hint he dropped once. My dear Eleanor left this world many years ago. He said it with such a light, almost theatrical sadness that it sounded like a rehearsed phrase. Everything changed last Saturday. It was a cloudy, muggy day, promising a thunderstorm. I was finishing my 3rd cup of coffee, trying to force myself to complete the most boring firmware update manual, when there was a knock at the door. It was Arthur. "John, I apologize for the disturbance," he began, in his always even, velvety voice. "I have a small request. I am acquiring new furniture for the bedroom, and I need to clear some space. Would you be so kind as to help me take the old wardrobe down to the basement? I understand it's an imposition, but I'm not as young as I used to be, and hiring movers, it's an unnecessary hassle." I was almost glad for the distraction. "Of course, Arthur, no problem. Right away." His house was a mirror image of mine, but sterile to a disturbing degree. Not a speck of dust on the polished surface of the console table in the hallway. Not a single item out of place. The air didn't smell of food or life, but of furniture polish with a faint hint of lavender. The old wardrobe, massive, oak with carved pediments, stood in his living room. It was heavy, incredibly heavy, but together we managed, slowly and carefully, carrying it through the hallway to the basement door. Arthur unlocked the door with a massive, old-fashioned key. When he opened it, a smell wafted out, of old stone, dust, and something else, a sweetish, musty odor, like withered flowers and damp earth. He clicked the light switch. An energy-saving bulb screwed into the ceiling socket flickered once or twice, and lit up, casting a dim, yellowish light that didn't so much illuminate as accentuate the darkness. That's when I saw them. In the depths of the basement, along the far wall, stood 3 more wardrobes, completely identical to the one we were carrying. The same dark oak, the same carvings, the same massive doors, and on each door, a brand new, shiny padlock. It struck me as odd. "Wow, Arthur, you've got a whole collection here," I blurted out as we struggled to place our wardrobe next to the others. He smiled with thin, almost bloodless lips. "An inheritance from the previous owners. Solid pieces. Seemed ashamed to throw them out. They serve as storage for old memories." We set the wardrobe down. I straightened up, rubbing the small of my back, and my gaze fell on the locks again. They were too new, too modern against this old furniture. There was something unnatural, sinister about them. "I think I'll fetch some tools from the garage." Arthur's voice brought me back to reality. "Need to secure it a bit. A leg is wobbly. You'll wait? I won't be long." I nodded, unable to utter a word. He turned and left, his footsteps fading up the stairs. I was left alone in the basement. The silence here was absolute, oppressive. It pressed on the eardrums. I stared at these 3 wardrobes. Old memories. What could that mean? Photographs? Clothes? Books? Curiosity? The very one that killed the cat began to gnaw at me from the inside. It was stronger than fear, stronger than the voice of reason whispering that I should run. I approached the nearest wardrobe. The lock was sturdy. I pulled on the door. Naturally, it didn't budge. I walked around the back of the wardrobes, hoping for a gap, but the back panels were solid, made of single pieces of wood. Then my gaze fell on Arthur's old corduroy jacket hanging on a hook by the stairs. He must have taken it off when we were bringing the wardrobe in. My hand almost reached for it on its own. I felt like a scoundrel, a thief, but I couldn't stop. I shoved my hand into the right pocket. Nothing. In the left, my fingers brushed against cold metal. A key ring. 3 keys, old but well-maintained. And, oh, the irony, 3 small, shiny keys for the padlocks. My heart started pounding in my throat. I selected one of the small keys, approached the first wardrobe, and, holding my breath, inserted it into the keyhole. It didn't fit. The second key, also no. The third, click. Loud, deafening in the silence of the basement, like a gunshot. I froze, listening for footsteps. Nothing. With a trembling hand, I removed the lock. It fell to the concrete floor with a dull, metallic clang. I grabbed the door handle. The wood was cold, almost icy. I pulled. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. It was dark inside. The light from the basement fell in, picking out contours from the gloom. I thought I saw old clothes, some dark bundles, and then my brain finally processed the information. They weren't bundles. It was a woman, or rather, what was left of her. She was sitting on a small stool inside the wardrobe, leaning against the back panel. Her body was completely mummified. Her skin, dark, parchment-like, stretched taut over the bones. Tufts of light, almost gray hair remained on her head. She was wearing a dress, once elegant, summery, with a floral pattern, now decayed and covered in dust. Her hands were folded in her lap. The eye sockets were empty, and from her slightly parted mouth, a silent, decades-long scream seemed to be escaping. I recoiled, hitting my back against the next wardrobe. My mouth went dry. My temples throbbed. I didn't scream. I couldn't make a sound. Horror, real, physical horror, paralyzed me. I looked at the other wardrobes. Now I knew. I knew. Forcing myself, I approached the second wardrobe. With trembling hands, I fumbled for the key. Inside was a man, elderly, also mummified, in a worn-out suit. He too was sitting in the same pose. The third wardrobe. A young girl, maybe 20 years old. Her red hair was braided into a plait that lay on her shoulder like a dead snake. Around her neck was a thick woolen scarf, tightly tied. I stood paralyzed before this hellish row. My mind refused to believe it. This couldn't be real. Mummies. 3 mummified bodies, neatly arranged like exhibits in a pathology museum, and the fourth wardrobe empty. It stood nearby, its door also locked, and that empty wardrobe was the most terrifying of all, because now I understood who it was intended for. For me, at that moment, a sound came from above, a faint creak of a floorboard. Footsteps. Arthur was returning. Panic, sharp and animalistic, finally shattered the paralysis. I rushed towards the stairs, but it was too late. His silhouette blocked the doorway. He stood there, looking down. He saw the open wardrobe doors. He saw my face, distorted by horror, and he saw the key ring in my hand. There was no anger or fury on his face, only a slight, almost paternal sadness. John. Arthur shook his head. Why did you do that? I thought we were friends. What? What is this? I squeezed out. my voice sounding like the creak of a rusty door. "This is my family," he said simply, slowly descending the steps. Each of his steps echoed hollowly in the basement silence. "Eleanor didn't leave me. She is always with me." He nodded towards the first woman. "And this is Mr. Peterson, my former boss. He was so lonely after his wife died. And this is Mary. She had such a sad smile. I saved them from loneliness. I gave them eternal peace and order." He said this with such calm, rational madness that my blood ran cold. He wasn't just a killer. He was a collector, a curator of his own horrifying museum of death. "And you want to put me in there?" I whispered, backing away towards the wall. "An empty wardrobe simply begs to be filled," he replied, and a glint flashed in his eyes, the one I had previously mistaken for simple eccentricity. "You are so lonely, John. Your life is routine and emptiness. I can make it eternal, impeccable." He was only a few steps away from me. He didn't have a weapon in his hand, but there was a lethal force in his confidence. I looked around in panic. In the corner, among the junk, I noticed an old, heavy cast-iron candlestick. "I don't want to be part of your collection, Arthur," I said, trying to inject a firmness into my voice that I didn't feel. "It's not a question of your desire, John. It's a question of completeness. The ensemble must be complete." He took a quick step forward. His hand, strong and sinewy, reached out to grab my throat. At the same moment, I lunged towards the corner, grabbed the candlestick. It was incredibly heavy. I spun around and with a wild cry, containing all my fear and despair, swung it. I wasn't aiming for his head. I didn't want to kill. I aimed for his shoulder. The blow landed with a dull, bony crunch. Arthur cried out, not a scream of pain, but rather a sound of profound astonishment and offense. He staggered back against the wall, clutching his injured collarbone. You've spoiled the harmony," he rasped, looking at me with genuine horror, as if I were the monster. I had no time to think. I rushed for the stairs, taking them two at a time. I burst into the hallway, then outside, into the fresh, storm-scented air. I ran without looking back to my house, slammed the door, and with trembling fingers, dialed 911. 3 months have passed. The police, of course, uncovered everything. The bodies of 3 people, missing at different times over the past 15 years, were found in the wardrobes. Eleanor Graves, his wife, had died from a sleeping pill overdose, and he, apparently unable to cope with her death, had started this gruesome ritual of preserving those he deemed too lonely for this world. Mr. Peterson really was his boss 30 years ago. Mary was a waitress at a cafe he used to visit in the mornings. Arthur is now in a high-security psychiatric hospital. He was found insane. The trial ended last week, but my life ended that day in the basement. I can't sleep without the light on. I can't enter my own walk-in closet without having a panic attack. I quit my job and moved to another part of the country, to a noisy apartment building where the walls are thin and I constantly hear the voices of my neighbors. But the most terrible thought that haunts me, coming in the moments of pre-dawn silence, is not the empty eye sockets of those poor souls. It's the calm, almost affectionate voice of Arthur, who said to me at the last court hearing, when our eyes met for a moment, "Don't worry, John, there's always a place for you. The ensemble must be complete." And I know that somewhere, in the darkest corner of my subconscious, that very oak wardrobe is already standing, and it's waiting. Story 2. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and 3 hours ago I almost became just another number in the missing persons statistics. I'm 23 years old, a graphic designer from Seattle, and I'm writing this now, wrapped in a blanket in my apartment, with a bandaged arm and under the watch of a police officer. But I need to get this out. I need someone else to know. The rain in Seattle isn't just weather, it's a state of the world. It washes away the colors, turns street lights into blurred smudges and makes the asphalt black and slippery like oil. I had stayed late at work, finishing a presentation. It was almost 11, the last bus was gone, and rideshare prices had skyrocketed. And then I saw it, an old, beat-up yellow taxi, as if it had emerged from the 80s. It drifted slowly past, and without thinking, I waved my hand. That was my first mistake. The door opened with a dull, damp click, letting in a smell of wet wool and old tobacco. I gave my address on 15th Avenue. The driver, a man in his 50s with damp, thinning hair and an overly wide smile, just nodded. His eyes in the rearview mirror were dull, like a fish washed ashore. I fastened my seatbelt, and the click sounded unusually loud, like the final door slamming shut. For the first few minutes, I just stared out the window, tired, but then my attention was caught by the soft glow of the navigator. I expected to see the familiar green and blue lines leading us downtown. Instead, the screen showed a single red route stretching into a solid black field, a place where even road designations ended. In the upper right corner, a message blinked. Destination 477529° N, 122.4869°W. Coordinates. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice from trembling. "The navigator is broken. We're going the wrong way." Silence. Only the sound of the wipers whining across the glass. He didn't turn his head. Didn't make a sound. His shoulders were still. "Hey!" My hand reached for his shoulder on its own, but stopped a centimeter from his skin. A shiver ran down my spine. I said, "You're going the wrong way. Stop the car." And then I saw his smile in the mirror. It widened, stretching unnaturally, revealing pale gums and teeth that were too even, too white. It wasn't a smile of joy or amusement. It was the smile of a predator who knows its prey is already trapped. His eyes remained dead. My heart hammered somewhere in my throat. I yanked the door handle. The lock didn't budge. I pressed the button on the central console. Nothing. I started hitting the window with my palm, but it was thick, shatterproof. "Open the door!" I screamed, my voice breaking into a hysterical shriek. He didn't react. His fingers tapped the steering wheel in time to some unheard, eerie melody. We turned off the highway onto a narrow, broken road leading into a dense coniferous forest. Branches, like bony fingers, scraped against the roof and sides of the car. The taxi bounced over potholes, throwing me around on the seat. It smelled of fear inside, sharp, sour. It was my own smell. I panicked, trying to find something. Anything. In the net of the front passenger seat, there were crumpled receipts, empty cigarette packs, and then my gaze fell on a small object stuck in the crack between the seats. It was a woman's lacquered hair clip, bright pink, with a chipped edge. It felt sticky to the touch. Next to it lay a child's pacifier. An icy horror seized my lungs. I wasn't the first. We drove like that for what seemed like an eternity. The forest thickened, swallowing the last glimpses of civilization. Finally, the headlights picked out a silhouette. A low, sagging structure with a collapsed roof. A deserted cabin. The car glided to a stop. He turned off the engine. The silence that rushed in after the noise of the engine was deafening. The rain now drummed on the metal like a million impatient fingers. The driver, unhurriedly, turned to face me. His smile hadn't faded. He slowly ran his hand over the pocket of his leather jacket, and I saw the long handle of something emerge. It wasn't a gun. It was a heavy hunting knife with a serrated blade. It gleamed dully in the dark with a greasy light. He got out of the car, and I heard the trunk click open. He was going to the trunk. This was my chance, my only one. I leaned back and kicked the window with all my strength. A dull thud. Nothing. I kicked again, aiming for the center. A crack, a spiderweb. I screamed, gathering all my rage and fear into one desperate surge, and kicked again and again until my boot broke through a hole. I widened it, tearing my hands on the sharp shards, not feeling the pain, only a wild animal terror. A clanging sound came from the trunk. He was looking for something. I pushed my head through the breach, scratching my neck, and tumbled out onto the wet, cold ground. Mud instantly clung to my clothes. I scrambled to my feet and ran into the thicket without looking back. Thorny branches whipped my face, tangled in my hair. I heard his heavy, rapid breathing behind me and a low, hoarse growl. "Come back, girl. Don't run. The game is just beginning." I tripped over a root and fell into a patch of ferns, burying my face in the rotting leaves. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would tear my chest apart. I lay there, not breathing, curled into a ball. He passed a few meters from me, his flashlight beam cutting tree trunks out of the darkness. He wasn't in a hurry. He knew these woods. He was heading for the cabin. When his silhouette disappeared into the doorway, I, trembling all over, crawled after him. I don't know what drove me. Maybe hope of finding a weapon. Maybe a desperate need to know what was inside. The door hung on one hinge. A dim yellow light seeped through the cracks. He had lit a kerosene lamp inside. I peered in. The air was thick and sweetish with the smell of decay and mold. The walls were covered in scratches, not words, just chaotic lines, as if someone had been sharpening claws. In the corner lay a pile of rags that had once been clothes, and on the rough wooden table, right under the lamp, lay that same pink hair clip. Next to it were several others, blue, purple, yellow, like trophies. And then I saw him. He stood with his back to me, running the tip of the knife along the wall, adding new grooves. He was humming something under his breath, a children's nursery rhyme, but to the tune of a funeral march. My breath caught. I recoiled, and my foot stepped on something hard. I looked down. The black case of a smartphone was peeking out from under the leaves. Someone else's. I picked it up. The screen was cracked, but the power button worked. The battery had 2% left. No signal, but emergency calls. They always work. I crawled farther away from the cabin, clutching the stranger's phone in my trembling fingers. I dialed 911. "Emergency services. What's your address?" a calm female voice asked. "I don't know the address," I whispered, holding back sobs. "I'm in the woods, a deserted cabin, a taxi driver. He has a knife. He's trying to find me." I gave the coordinates I had seen on the navigator. 477529 to Great N, 122.4869 IW. Remember it. The police arrived in 20 minutes, 20 eternities. I heard him, upon hearing the sirens, run out of the cabin with a wild roar. Then gunshots, not at him, into the air. They subdued him on the doorstep of his personal hell. The officer who found me shaking behind a tree said he didn't even resist. He just kept smiling, his eerie, lifeless smile. They found things in the cabin, lots of things, clothes, jewelry, documents, 7 sets in total, 7 trophies. The pink clip belonged to Katie Lawrence, who went missing 2 months ago. They took me to the station, gave me a blanket and coffee. His name is Arthur Briggs. He worked as a taxi driver in the 80s, and after being fired for strange behavior, he bought a decommissioned car and continued his route, a route to nowhere. Right now, I'm home. My hands are stitched up, but I can't close my eyes. Every time I do, I see his smile in the mirror, and I hear the quiet click of the locked door. Story 3. Hello, everyone. I don't know why I'm writing this. Maybe it's a last attempt to somehow express what's eating me up inside. Maybe it's a cry into the void, so as not to feel so alone in these final minutes. Reddit was a place for me where I just read other people's stories, never thinking mine would end up here, and certainly not in this form. My name is Lisa. I'm 29. I work as a junior analyst at a small marketing firm in Amsterdam. I've always been a quiet, unnoticeable person. My life is the Weesperplein metro to work and back, cooking for one, Netflix series, and rare, awkward Tinder dates that lead nowhere. I'm like a background noise-canceling headset in someone else's life. I'm not noticed as long as I function properly. My parents are in Rotterdam. They call once a week, asking if I've met anyone. I lie that it's all ahead of me. I don't even believe it myself. It all started 3 days ago, on Monday. I'd stayed late at work, finishing another meaningless report on social media engagement for a toothpaste brand. It was about 11 in the evening. The office was empty. Only me and the perpetual smell of old coffee from our vending machine remained. I went outside. That typical Dutch rain was falling, not heavy but nagging, fine like mist, turning the streetlights into blurry yellow spheres. I live in the Javastraat area, not quite the center. There are lots of old garage cooperatives here, low brick buildings left over from the last century. The walk from the metro to my house takes 7 minutes through a few quiet, poorly lit alleys. I've walked this route for 5 years and nothing ever happened. That evening, passing by one of these garage rows, a long gray building with rusty roller shutters, I heard sounds. At first, I thought it was cats fighting, a screechy, metallic sound. I slowed my pace, and then I realized it wasn't cats. It was a human voice, a man's. He wasn't shouting words. It was a pure, animalistic sound of horror and pain, something like a stifled ah, which was immediately cut short, as if someone had choked it off mid-sound. Then a dull thud, like a heavy sandbag being thrown down. And again, that moan. Everything inside me tightened into an icy lump. I froze in the middle of the sidewalk, in the pool of light from the only working street lamp. My brain shut down. There were no thoughts of, I need to call the police, or run. There were no thoughts at all. There was only a primal, all-consuming fear. That sound, that scream, resonated with the most archaic part of my consciousness, the part that remembers what it's like to be prey. I didn't run. I backed away, as if hypnotized, not taking my eyes off the dark gap between two garages, from where I thought the sounds were coming. Then another sound came, short, wet, squelching, and I broke. I ran like I hadn't run since school, without looking back. The rain beat against my face, the backpack with my laptop painfully thumping against my back. I burst into my building, rushed headlong up to the 3rd floor, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. After locking the door with all the locks and the chain, I leaned my back against it and just stood there, trying to catch my breath. My heart was pounding somewhere in my throat. I told myself they were just drunks or hooligans, nothing serious. I almost believed it myself. I took a shower, made tea, and went to bed, pulling the blanket over my head like a child hiding from monsters. For 2 days, I lived in this bubble of denial. Tuesday passed in a haze. I worked on autopilot, answered emails, went to meetings, but that cold lump sat inside me the whole time. On Wednesday morning, drinking coffee, I was scrolling through the local news feed on my phone, and I saw it. The headline read, "Suspect arrested in brutal garage murder on Javastraat in Amsterdam." I felt the blood drain from my face. I opened the article. On Monday night, 34-year-old Bradley Watherson, a graphic design teacher from the UK, was brutally murdered in his garage. According to police, Mr. Watherson's body was discovered by his neighbor on Tuesday afternoon. The victim's body had 71 stab wounds. Police have arrested a suspect, 28-year-old Leonardo Fabro, who, it turns out, was acquainted with the victim. The motive for the crime is presumed to be an argument over personal matters. 71 times. Those words cut into me like the stab wounds themselves. 71. I imagined it. Not a quick, lightning act, but a long, methodical, furious process. Each blow was that sound I heard. Each moan. I sat and calculated in my mind. If it all lasted, say, 5 minutes, that's one blow every 4 seconds, nonstop. And his name, Bradley Watherson, design teacher. I Googled him, found his Instagram page. He was a short, smiling blonde with freckles on his nose. In the photos, he was traveling, drinking coffee with friends, posting sketches from his notebook. He taught students to make the world more beautiful, and his world was turned into a bloody slaughterhouse in an old garage, a 7-minute walk from my home. And I stood there, outside. I heard it, and I ran away. At that moment, something in me broke. Finally and irrevocably, a feeling of guilt washed over me with such force that I physically couldn't breathe. I started shaking. I ran to the bathroom and threw up. 2 days have passed since then. 2 days that feel like an eternity in hell. I haven't been to work. I haven't answered calls from my boss or my mom. I've turned everything off. I sit in my apartment within these 4 walls that used to be my refuge and have now become a torture chamber. Every sound outside makes me flinch. I hear voices that aren't there. I think someone is standing outside the door. Last night, I thought I heard that same stifled moan coming from the ventilation. I didn't sleep all night, sitting in the corner of the room with the TV on full blast to drown out the silence that screams at me about my cowardice. I analyzed those seconds over and over again. Why didn't I call? My phone was in my pocket. I could have just dialed 112 and whispered the address. I could have at least done that. Maybe they wouldn't have saved him. But 71 stab wounds. Maybe if the police had arrived right after the first ones, maybe he would still be alive. Maybe he bled out while I was making myself tea and trembling in fear for my worthless skin. I saw his face, his smile. I imagined what his last look was like, full of confusion, betrayal, horror. He was calling for help, and the world, in the form of a frightened girl in a raincoat, ignored him, ran away. I don't eat. I don't sleep. I just sit and stare into space. This afternoon, I tried to go out for groceries. I got to the corner, saw a group of teenagers, and such panic overwhelmed me that I ran back, gasping for breath. My world has shrunk to the size of this living room, and even here there is no safety. I understand that this is the end, not in the sense that I want to die, but in the sense that the Lisa who was before is already dead. She was erased, ground to dust by this feeling of guilt. What remains is just a shell, filled with fear and self-loathing. And this shell can no longer function. I can't cope. I really can't cope. The thought of living with this for another day, week, year, a whole life, is unbearable. This isn't life. It's a slow, agonizing punishment. And so, this has to end. I have a handful of knives in my hand. The very one I used to chop vegetables for stew when I thought my life was just a boring backstory before something great. It's cold and heavy. It seems so logical a conclusion, symbolic, almost poetic, to end a story that began with a knife itself. I'm writing this, and I think I hear a siren in the distance, probably my imagination. Or not. It doesn't matter anymore. I'm sorry, Bradley. I should have helped. I should have done something. My only excuse, that I was too scared, sounds so pathetic and insignificant in the face of what happened to you. To everyone reading this, if you hear a scream, don't be like me. Call, shout, do anything, because otherwise that scream will haunt you forever, even through the silence. That's all. The end is enough.